I was halfway through welding the last hinge onto the new steel gate when I heard the unmistakable sound of high heels stabbing into concrete. I didn't bother turning around, I already knew who it was. "Yorick," came that nasal bark. "What is this monstrosity?" I sighed, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and faced the HOA's queen herself, Valetta Norridge. Late 50s, permanently scowling, and believed the HOA bylaws were the equivalent of federal law. She was the president of the Sweet Maple Estates HOA and somehow made a full-time job out of harassing anyone who dared improve their property without her holy blessing. "It's a gate," I said calmly, "for my driveway, on my property." Valetta's eyes narrowed behind her oversized sunglasses. "You didn't submit a modification request." "I don't need to. The CCRs say fence additions that don't obstruct public access or community property are fine. This," she snapped, pointing at the gate with a trembling finger, "changes the aesthetic of the neighborhood. It's a black wrought iron gate, not a dragon statue." She didn't like that. An hour later, while I was bolting the keypad box on, a patrol car rolled up. Right on cue. I stood there, arms folded, grease on my hands, watching the officer step out with the kind of exhausted look that said he already regretted being here. "Sir." "We got a call about an illegal construction blocking access," the officer said. "Mind explaining?" I gestured to the gate. "That's my driveway. That's my property line." "Want to see the plat map?" Valetta stormed up, arms flailing. "He's barricading the neighborhood." "That road is shared access," the officer blinked. "Ma'am, that's his private drive. It's not even connected to the main loop." "It feels like shared access," she huffed. The officer looked at me, then back at her. "Ma'am, feelings aren't law." "He's within his rights." I handed over a copy of the CCRs and the county's property map just to be thorough. The cop gave a short nod, wished me luck, and left without another word. Valetta stood there frozen, lips twitching like she wanted to scream but couldn't decide how. She finally spat. "I'll be bringing this up at the board meeting. Don't get too comfortable." I gave her a thumbs up and went back to my gate. What I didn't tell her yet was that the only road that led to her corner lot house curved around the back of my property. My new gate. It sat right across the easement she used. Technically, I still had to allow passage, but nothing said I couldn't control it, so I added a keypad. For security. By the end of the week, the gate was fully operational. And the next morning, Valetta stood outside it, arms crossed, glaring at the camera like it owed her money. She pressed the call button. "Open it," she demanded. "I need your access code," I replied through the intercom. "You know I don't have one. That's the problem." I leaned closer to the mic. "You'll need to submit a formal request, in writing, HOA style." "You're joking." "Valetta, you taught me the process. I'm just following HOA protocol." Valetta didn't push the intercom again after that morning. She just stood there for several minutes, shoes planted in the dirt like she was trying to mentally bend the gate open with silent rage. I watched her on the security feed from my workshop window, then turned back to the brake line I was replacing on a client's Chevy. I figured she'd either storm off or try escalating in some ridiculous way. I underestimated her creativity. That evening, when I came inside to grab a bite, my neighbor Clark was waiting by my front porch with a six-pack and a raised brow. "You got a minute?" he asked. I nodded and held the door open for him. We sat at the kitchen island and he cracked 2 beers. Clark wasn't the type to show up uninvited unless something was off. "She called a special board meeting," he said. "Didn't even wait for the next scheduled one. Just blasted out an email saying urgent matters and roped in the usual loyalists." I took a sip. "Let me guess. Emergency vote to revoke my non-existent gate permit?" He gave a dry laugh. "Worse. She's claiming the easement was misfiled with the county and that the HOA actually owns the strip that runs behind your property." I leaned back in my chair. "That's not just wrong. That's borderline fraudulent." "Yeah, well, she says she's got a realtor friend pulling title records to prove it." He made air quotes. I don't think she gets how paper trails work. I opened my laptop and pulled up the scanned copy of the easement deed I'd gotten from the county recorder's office 3 years ago. It clearly outlined the access strip as a conditional easement private property on my end with access granted to the parcels beyond it. I sent Clark a copy right then. She tries to claim ownership over that, I said. She's messing with recorded land use. That's not just petty. That's illegal. Clark finished his beer and stood. Just keep your head down for now, she's flailing. But Valetta didn't flail. She schemed. The next morning, I woke up to a tow truck idling at the end of my driveway. The driver was talking to someone through the intercom. I opened the gate and walked down, still tying my boots with my phone recording in my pocket. "Can I help you?" I asked. The driver, a guy in a reflective vest and with a clipboard, looked confused. "I got a work order to remove an unauthorized obstruction from community property." Said there was a gate on HOA land. Did the order include a copy of the parcel map or just a complaint? He scratched his head. Just a printed letter, no signature, no city seal. I took the paper he offered. It had Sweet Maple Estates letterhead, but it wasn't notarized. No legal reference number, just a vague demand to remove the unauthorized structure. I held it up and pointed to the bottom corner. "This isn't a legal removal order, and if you touch that gate, you'll be liable for trespass and destruction of private property." The driver backed off immediately. "Hey, I'm just the middleman. If it's not legit, I'm gone." I watched him turn the truck around and leave. Then I marched straight to the city zoning office and filed a complaint. That same afternoon, I got the call. A city planner named Marisol asked if I could meet in person. I brought every document I had. When she saw Valetta's fake letter, she frowned. "This looks like she tried to forge a zoning directive. That's a felony. You mind if I forward this to the city attorney?" "Please do," I said. By the time I got home, Valetta was already pacing by the gate again, talking animatedly on her phone. I didn't interrupt. I had nothing to say to her until the city took a closer look. 2 days later, a white SUV with a city seal on the door pulled up. Out stepped Marisol and a man in a gray suit. They walked right past the gate, checked the easement markers, and knocked on my door. "Mr. Dorsey," said the man, introducing himself as Assistant City Attorney Martin Laker. "We'll need your statement officially." "Do you have time now?" I showed them to the dining room and handed over the documents again. They took photos, asked questions, and then Martin said something that made me sit up straight. "We've also received multiple complaints from other residents. Apparently, this isn't the first time the HOA president has issued false notices under city authority. She's been handing out citations like parking tickets," I said. "Tried to fine me once for parking my own truck in my driveway." He nodded. "We've opened an investigation. Depending on what we find, criminal charges may follow." Clark stopped by again that night, this time with a folder of his own. He dug through his records and found a letter Valetta sent him last year threatening legal seizure of his garden shed unless he painted it HOA beige. "She's got the board so scared of her they just nod along," he said. "But if the city's finally involved," I nodded, "she's losing ground." The next morning, Valetta changed tactics. She showed up at my gate again, this time wearing a concerned smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I answered through the intercom. "Yorick," she began, "I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting to discuss a reasonable compromise." "Is this before or after you forged a city removal order?" She blinked. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Then maybe you should call the city attorney. He seems to." Her smile dropped. "I'm not obligated to open this gate for anyone," I continued, "but I've been doing it as a courtesy. If you want that courtesy to continue, I suggest you stop trying to sabotage my property." "You're threatening to cut off access to my home," she hissed. "No, I'm telling you the code system is getting updated. Anyone who wants access will need to request it through a formal easement agreement. Including you. You can't, I already did." She stormed off, and I made the changes that night. The new system logged every code entry and had individual IDs tied to each user. That meant any abuse like unauthorized use or tampering would be traceable. 3 days later, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. "Afternoon," he said with a professional nod. "We received a report that you're unlawfully blocking community access." I sighed and invited him in, laid out the documents, and showed him the security footage logs. Then I handed him a copy of Martin Laker's letter confirming the city's investigation into the HOA board. The deputy read it twice, then shook his head. "You're in the clear. Actually, we may need to talk to her." An hour later, a cruiser rolled up to Valetta's house. I watched from my window as she was escorted out onto the lawn and questioned. She didn't go quietly. Voices were raised, neighbors peeked through blinds. By nightfall, the neighborhood newsletter was buzzing. Clark texted me later. "Half the board just resigned." "She's trying to spin it as a smear campaign," I replied. "Good, let her spin. I've got receipts." The next weekend, I hosted a barbecue. Half the neighborhood showed up. The gate clicked open and closed all afternoon, letting in guests who had all willingly requested their own temporary codes. They brought food, drinks, stories. And slowly the narrative shifted. The gate stayed. So did the new code system. Valetta, on the other hand, didn't. She put her house on the market 3 weeks later. The listing description didn't mention the easement, or the gate, or the fact that the HOA president was under investigation for abuse of power. But the neighbors knew. And they made sure every prospective buyer knew too. 2 weeks had passed since Valetta's very public meltdown on her front lawn, and the neighborhood had adopted a strange kind of cautious optimism. The HOA board, half-gutted and rudderless, had gone quiet. No new emails, no newsletters, no surprise inspections, just silence. It was unnerving at first, like the eye of a storm, but I wasn't about to let my guard down. Then, on a Thursday morning just after sunrise, I noticed something that didn't sit right. I was sipping coffee in the workshop, checking the driveway cam logs when an alert flagged an overnight event. I clicked it open. Time stamped at 3:42 a.m. The footage showed a silhouette slipping through the shrubs on the south side of the gate. The figure paused, looked up at the keypad, then produced something small, metallic, glinting. I leaned forward. It wasn't a resident, too tall. Hooded sweatshirt, gloves. The person worked at the keypad box for about 40 seconds, then backed away and vanished into the trees. I rewound. They hadn't entered a code. They were trying to tamper with it. I saved the footage to a flash drive, called the non-emergency line, and had a county deputy at my door within the hour. "You didn't recognize them?" Deputy Alvarez asked, brows drawn tight. "No," I said, "but whoever it was knew exactly where the camera blind spots were." "Almost. You think this has to do with the HOA mess? I've got a strong hunch," I said, handing her the flash drive. "And there's something else." I pulled a plastic evidence bag from my tool chest. Inside was a snapped-off piece of wire, the kind used in older bypass tools. I'd found it that morning near the gate post, half buried in the gravel. Alvarez's tone shifted. "That's attempted tampering with private property. If we can ID the person, that's criminal intent." She left with the bag and the footage, promising to follow up. I returned to the gate, reinforced the keypad housing with a steel shroud, and installed a second, hidden camera pointed low-angled to catch anyone approaching from the side brush. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Marisol, the city planner. Her voice was sharper than usual. "We've got a situation," she said. "The county assessor's office received a forged land adjustment request. Someone tried to file a boundary revision to claim that the easement was HOA controlled. They tried to alter the recorded plat. Worse. They used a fake notary stamp and submitted it under a fabricated trust name. If the clerk hadn't flagged the inconsistencies, it might have been approved automatically." My jaw tightened. "That's not just fraud, that's a felony. We've escalated it to the DA's office. If they trace the submission back to Valetta or anyone acting on the HOA's behalf, this is going to court." I didn't respond right away. I was already pulling up the property record portal, looking for any sign of unusual activity. Sure enough, a placeholder document had been uploaded and then flagged as invalid. The originating IP had been logged. By evening, I had 2 officers and a county investigator in my kitchen. They took full statements, combed the area by the gate, and collected the wire scrap I'd found. One of the officers, a tech crime specialist named Dana, confirmed something chilling. The bypass tool, that's not garage grade, that's the kind locksmiths use. Someone either knew what they were doing or paid someone who did. Any prints? I asked. Partial, she said. But we pulled a clean one off the outer keypad casing. We're running it now. Over the next 2 days, things escalated fast. The county DA's office issued a subpoena to the HOA for all internal communications over the last 2 months. A forensic accountant was assigned to audit their funds. Apparently, the forged land adjustment wasn't the only document under suspicion. There were now questions about how certain landscaping contracts had been awarded, including one that paid over $12,000 to a company that didn't exist. Then came the break. I was in the middle of replacing a radiator fan on a neighbor's old Ford when Dana returned. She stepped out of her cruiser holding a folder. "We got the match," she said. "The print on your keypad came back to a man named Anton Merrick." "Don't know the name," I said. "He owns a locksmith shop in the next county over. He also happens to be Valetta Norridge's nephew." I let out a slow exhale. "So she sent family to break into my system?" "Looks that way. Merrick's already confessed to attempting access under her instructions. Said she told him the gate was illegally installed and she had the authority to remove it. She doesn't." "We know. So does the DA," Dana said. "They've issued a warrant. She's being picked up within the hour." I didn't ask for updates after that. I didn't need to. The next morning, half the neighborhood was out on their lawns, watching an unmarked cruiser pull up to Valetta's house. She came out in a beige cardigan, clutching a folder and trying to talk over the officer's shoulder. He didn't listen. He simply handed her the warrant and read her rights. The folder slipped from her hands, papers scattered across the grass. Clark wandered over from his place holding a mug of coffee. He watched in silence as the cruiser pulled away. "She'll try to spin this too," he said finally. "Doesn't matter anymore," I replied. "The city's taken over interim management of the HOA until a special election can be held. Her authority's gone." He gave a short, satisfied nod. "Good." That weekend, I hosted another cookout, not a celebration, just a gathering. People brought folding chairs and covered dishes. Someone brought a Bluetooth speaker. Someone else brought a cornhole set. The gate stayed open the whole time, but this time I didn't have to monitor it. A week later, I got a call from the assistant DA, a woman named Reina Carver. "We're preparing charges for falsifying municipal documents, conspiracy to commit fraud, and unlawful access to restricted property," she said. "We'd also like to call you as a witness when the case goes to court." "Happy to," I said. She's used her title to bully people for years. Someone needed to draw the line. "You did more than that. You buried it in concrete and welded steel on top," I chuckled. "That gate wasn't just for security, it was a boundary." "Well, thanks to you, she's finally on the other side of it." The trial didn't take long to gain attention. Local news picked it up after the affidavit was unsealed. The headline read, "HOA president charged with land fraud and breaking into residents' security system." The story spread fast. Suddenly, Sweet Maple Estates became the case study for what happens when HOAs overstep. The HOA's remaining board members resigned days before the court date. A temporary management firm was brought in, but the city had already begun drafting an ordinance to increase oversight over all HOAs in the county. I testified behind a simple wooden bench, documents in hand, footage queued up on a flash drive. Valetta sat across the room, jaw tight, eyes hollow. She didn't say a word the entire time. When the verdict came in guilty on all counts, there was no applause, just silence. The kind that settles when something long overdue finally lands. Afterward, Clark invited me over for a beer. We sat on his back deck, watching the sun dip behind the ridge. "Think she'll serve time?" he asked. "Probably probation, fines, maybe house arrest." "But she'll never touch HOA leadership again," he nodded. "That gate of yours might have saved the whole neighborhood." I took a long sip of cold beer. "Funny thing is, I only built it to keep my driveway clear. Ended up building a wall against corruption." "Yeah," I said. "And it only cost me $600 and a few angry emails." He grinned. "Worth every penny." As the evening settled in, porch lights flickered on across the block. Kids rode bikes down the lane. Someone turned on a sprinkler. Just normal neighborhood sound, something we hadn't had in a while. The gate stood at the edge of it all, quiet, unmoving, and locked as always. The week after the trial, things in Sweet Maple Estates began to shift in ways I hadn't expected. With the old board officially dissolved by court order and a professional property management firm stepping in temporarily, the neighborhood finally had a chance to breathe. For the first time in years, people weren't watching their front yards like they were under surveillance. Porch lights stayed on later. Conversations lingered on sidewalks. It was a subtle but powerful change. Still, there was one loose end that hadn't quite been tied up yet: the gate. Though Valetta was gone, the easement remained active. By law, I still had to allow access through the driveway to the residents living at the far end of the loop, 3 houses, all occupied by families who had nothing to do with the mess she'd created. They'd each signed the updated easement agreement I'd drafted with a real estate attorney, which laid out terms for access, maintenance responsibility, and code assignment. It was straightforward, professional, and most importantly legal. But there was something else the investigation had turned up. Something that hadn't made the news. One morning, Rihanna Carver, the assistant DA, called me again. Her tone wasn't urgent, but there was something measured in the way she spoke. "You have a few minutes. We uncovered a second account Valetta was using for HOA funds." "It's bad." I met her at the county offices that afternoon. She sat me down in a private conference room and handed me a folder thick with statements. She was funneling HOA dues into a private account under a fictitious vendor name. Over $30,000 across 2 years. I flipped through the documents. Each withdrawal was masked as routine maintenance, but none of the companies listed existed. Some of the charges were for things like community electrical repairs and security lighting upgrades, none of which had ever actually been done. "She's already been convicted," I said. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because she used one of your invoices as a template," Rihanna replied. "From the year you helped your neighbor install that carport cover. She copied the format and faked a company with a similar name." I stared at her. "She used my business as cover?" "Not directly, but close enough that it could have raised questions. Fortunately, you're clean." "We've already cleared your name with the auditors, but we thought you should know." I leaned back in my chair, disgusted. "So even after she lost, she kept dragging people down with her." "That's what makes this next part important," Rihanna said. "The city is drafting a civil case on behalf of the HOA's residents. We estimate each household was overcharged by at least $400 during her term. Let me guess, class action." "Exactly, and we'd like you to be the primary plaintiff." I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure I wanted any more of this in my life. But then I thought about all the people who'd been too intimidated to speak up while she was in power, people who'd been fined, bullied, or ignored. They deserved to get something back. "All right," I said. "I'll sign on." The news broke a week later. A formal civil complaint was filed against Valetta Norridge, naming her as the sole beneficiary of misappropriated HOA funds. The suit was backed by over 60 residents. The property management firm sent out letters to every homeowner explaining how to join and how to claim restitution if the court ruled in their favor. It was the final nail in the coffin. Valetta had already sold her house at a loss. The buyer was a retired couple from out of state who didn't care about the politics, they just liked the view. I met them during their first week and handed them their gate code with a smile and a copy of the easement agreement. They signed it without hesitation. "You've probably heard stories," I said. "Just know things are better now." The husband laughed. "We drove across 5 states to retire in peace. If a gate is the worst thing we deal with, we'll call that a win." But peace didn't mean everything stopped. The property management firm held a community meeting at the local library to discuss the future of the HOA. For the first time in over a decade, residents were allowed to nominate themselves for the board without needing a sponsor. No more secret ballots, no more backroom appointments. Clark stood up first. "I'm not a lawyer or a politician," he said. "I'm just tired of watching good people get pushed around. I'll serve 1 term, that's it, but I'll make sure our books are clean and our rules are fair." He got a standing ovation. A schoolteacher volunteered, then a nurse. Then an electrician. No one with an agenda, just neighbors tired of being afraid to plant flowers without permission. The vote was held that Saturday. I didn't run, I didn't need to. I'd already done my part. Instead, I spent that afternoon in my workshop, tuning a carburetor and listening to the wind chimes on the porch. Around 5, my gate buzzed. I checked the monitor. It was a delivery van. I keyed it open remotely and watched it roll through. The driver gave a quick wave to the camera. I waved back from the window. That night, I walked the perimeter of the property with a flashlight. Not because I was worried, just because it had become a habit. As I reached the far corner, by the grove of bay trees where the camera had once caught Valetta's nephew trying to break in, I paused. The brush had grown back, but I could still see the faint path he'd taken. I kicked a few leaves over it and turned back toward the house. The gate stood tall behind me, silent and steady. 2 months later, the civil case finally closed. The court ruled in favor of the residents. Valetta was ordered to pay restitution and legal fees. She didn't show up, not in person, not even by video. Her attorney filed a motion to delay sentencing due to personal stress. The judge denied it. Each household received a check in the mail. Mine was a little over $500. I didn't cash it. I framed it, hung it right above the workbench in the shop. Clark stopped by that evening carrying a pizza box and a bottle of something brown. "You got your check," "Framed it," I said, opening the door. He laughed. "Knew you would." "Want to open the gate for old time's sake?" "Already did." We sat outside, eating on the porch, watching the sky turn orange. Across the street, kids were drawing chalk dragons on the sidewalk. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Porch lights flicked on one by one. "You think she ever figured out where she went wrong?" Clark asked between bites. "No," I said. "People like her don't reflect, they just point fingers." He nodded, chewing. "Still, it's good to have our neighborhood back." "Yeah," I said. "It is." The next week, the new HOA board held their first open meeting in the community park. No one was fined for bringing their own chairs. No one was told to turn their music down. The board opened with public comments. People actually smiled when they spoke. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. Instead, I stayed home, welding a new mailbox post for the retired couple at the end of the street. They'd asked if I could make something sturdy. I told them I'd make it Valetta-proof. The neighborhood had changed. Not because of a lawsuit, not because of a gate, but because people stopped giving power to someone who didn't deserve it. And now, the only thing that stood between my driveway and the road was a keypad, a steel gate, and a community that finally remembered what it meant to stand together. No more forged notices. No more fake citations. No more urgent board meetings about fence colors, just neighbors. And that was more than enough.